Hallo, willkommen. Welcome to this presentation, The Importance of Metalinguistic Awareness in Foreign Language Teaching. My name is Rodrigo Rodrigues. I am from Liaison Applied Linguistics, Brazil. Let's talk about how we collected this data, right? So the data that we use in this presentation comes from empirical data over 10,000 hours applying the methodology Brain Connected teaching foreign languages. The methodology Brain Connected is a holistic approach for foreign language teaching. Based on 6 languages, we taught English, French, Spanish, German, Portuguese, and Italian. Different teachers as well. The students from age from 9 to 61, from different nationalities, and the levels from basic to advanced level. We're talking about learning languages. If we are talking about that, it's very important to understand who is behind learning a language. For sure that it is the individual learning that language. But what makes possible is the brain. Without our brain, we wouldn't have the language as it is. We wouldn't use it as we use it. So if you want to understand language teaching, you have to understand the brain, its characteristics. For example, connectivity. The neuronal network is composed by 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion synapses, connections between neurons, and many different types of neurons. When we are teaching a language, we must use connectivity, association. Why? Because that's the way the brain behaves. Patterns. The brain is very powerful about observing patterns and applying them. For example, I have a son, he's 3 years old, and it's very interesting. He perceives patterns while he's learning the mother tongue. For example, he perceived that verbs, one verb, specific verb, he started conjugating and pronouncing it in the regular form. But this verb is irregular. He had never listened to my wife or to me speaking that way. But he observed a pattern and he applied it. So the language, the brain is very powerful about perceiving patterns, creating them, and applying them. And mainly while we are children, there is this, we used to call it this linguistic engine, a propelling motor helping you to explore the language, to apply patterns. It's very interesting. We have also the feedback loop. The feedback loop we use for everything. For seeing what is happening, for example, if there is an obstacle, you need to go around the obstacle, right? And if someone is talking to you, but we use also for language. when we are pronouncing things and we said something wrong, many times we perceive that. So, and we use the feedback loop even with the mother tongue. For example, when you pronounce a phrase and that phrase doesn't express what you wanted, and sometimes in the middle of the phrase, you start saying in another way. So what you want to communicate, you're communicating in a better way. So more than contrast between languages, we use the contrast between the mental language and the mother tongue. Another characteristics of the brain is the optimization. And with this example, it makes really clear. The K computer was created in Japan in 2016 with 82,000 processors, simulating 1.73 billion neurons, using the energy 10 billion times more energy than the brain uses. With 40 minutes of processing, it could simulate 1 second of 1% of the human brain activity. When we talk about the brain, we are talking about a machine very powerful for optimizing processes. So when someone tells that the student can't translate because it will be slow when he's speaking, when he's communicating, that's not the case for the brain. When it is sure about something, it will try to take the shortest path. Another perspective here is the brain as a software. So it is not necessary to know how the brain is coded, but only how it works. My original graduation is in computer science. And so, for example, you may be a user of a Mac OS, the Windows operating system, or Linux. You know how to use that operating system. You know how the operating system works, actually, right? And you can even be certified an advanced user of that operating system without knowing one line of code that built that operating system. That's similar with the brain. For sure, that is absolutely important for neurologists and the other areas of study to study the brain. Absolutely, that's very, very important. But in parallel to that, we may connect to our students. We have many cases that students were trying for decades with many methodologies and many schools trying to learn, and they thought that they couldn't learn a foreign language. And after applying the methodology and going through the journey with them, it was really beautiful to see how they could learn and how the brain would react. Different people, different nationalities, different languages, the same pattern. It's very important not to think about methodologies and how to teach language from the lab. It's important to connect with the students, with the lives being transformed by those methodologies, by those methods. Learning a language is all about language transfer. The brain will observe the mother tongue, and actually we will learn the mother tongue, and very important, conscious or subconscious. And we'll master in the phonology, the morphology, the syntax, the metalinguistic as a whole. And when we are learning a foreign language, an additional language, the brain will try to use that phonology, that morphology, those patterns from the mother tongue into the target language that you're learning. So for example, I will try to pronounce a word in English using the phonology from Portuguese, which is the one that I know how it works. The thing is that for the cases that the phonology or one of these areas, they match, it will produce positive effects. But for many of the cases, and by the way, many times is the majority, it will produce negative impacts. The brain uses language transfer all the time when you're learning a foreign language. And this is one problem that we must talk about. Why the failure rate on foreign language acquisition is so high? The answer is poor metalinguistic awareness. Again, conscious or subconscious. When we teach that the phonology in Portuguese is in one way and in English is in another way, and we produce association between them, we create contrast. It's very, very meaningful. The morphology, that sometimes in Portuguese you have a noun, and at the end when you use a suffix, that noun becomes an adjective, an adverb. The same many times happens in English. For sure that you have the exception, but the rule would apply for, let's say, 60% of the cases, which is a lot. So creating contrast and using translation. If you believe that contrast between languages can be positive, you believe in translation. When you translate, you're using contrast all the time. You're trying to see what word in this language and in that language would be the closest possible in meaning. Actually, we have contrast in our own language. If I tell you a word, even in English, for example, and you don't know that word, you won't have contrast to do with that word. Another important thing is to teach using a spiral approach. Many times we want to teach in a serial way. So, first chapter, second chapter, third chapter, and we don't go back. The problem is that if you have a gap in the metalinguistic structure of the student, he will have problems moving forward with his learning. And when you use contrast, when you use two languages, the mother tongue and the target language, for teaching a language, That's really interesting because you're creating association, and many times you find that the student had a gap or in the mother tongue or actually in the metalinguistic structure. If a student, for example, doesn't know how to identify a noun or an adjective in the mother tongue, he won't be able to recognize that pattern or those structures into the target language he's learning. So using contrast between languages is very powerful because you get to the root cause of his problem. So he starts to learn faster and in a more meaningful way. And the pleasure they feel is contagious. One example here. In Portuguese, we say, for example, how old I am, for example, and this is not my age, by the way. Eu tenho 27 anos. I would like to have that age. and translating literally, it is, I have 27 years. But then, we teach that, in English we say, I am 27 years old. So you show that we use a structure in Portuguese and another structure in English. And they understand that it's different. So they see that it's related to culture. And then they don't start to just memorize way of saying it. They get connected to the language. And as a consequence, to the culture. So the solution here is presenting the metalinguistic of each language, right? The phonology, creating association and contrast between them, establishing connections, meaningful connections. As you do that, the student starts to perceive more and more patterns. Sometimes will be something that's incorrect, then the teacher is there to help to understand in the right way. And then you start to create an autonomous learner, someone that starts to become independent. And when we talk about a globalized world with a lot of content to be consumed, wow. When they go over that first step of becoming independent and observing patterns and creating contrast, my language works this way, that language works the other way, that's really beautiful and powerful. And not just that, when they do that for learning the first language, the first additional language, they are ready to learn a third language because they went like they know that it will be the same way with a different phonology, morphology, syntax, etc. And they create connections and association between the languages. Our next step is we are writing a book. We are on chapter 3. And our target is to be in 2 years in this conference that we love so much and presenting this book in English and being able to share with the attendants. So it talks about the 9 principles, a holistic approach for foreign language teaching. Mental language, morphological awareness, phonological awareness, linguistic engine, individual awareness, neurological awareness, rule and exception, organic learning, and cross-check. Thank you.